Ever feel like you kind of lose yourself a bit in a relationship?
Use yourself.
Yeah, like you're constantly compromising, going with the flow, and then suddenly you're like, wait, who am I?
The age-old dilemma. To bend or not to bend. It's a tricky one for sure.
And that's exactly what we're diving deep into today. This whole idea of compromise versus standing your ground in relationships.
Because, let's be real, relationships thrive on a delicate balance, right?
Totally. So where do we even begin with this?
Well, I think the first step is busting this myth that compromise is always the answer.
Right, like it's not always as simple as meet in the middle.
Exactly. Compromise, at its core, is about finding that sweet spot where both partners feel heard, respected, and honestly, like they're getting a fair deal.
And I think sometimes people forget that fair doesn't always mean equal.
Absolutely. It's not about keeping score. It's about recognizing that sometimes one person might need to bend a little more than the other, depending on the situation.
And the key is that it's got to be a two-way street.
100%. Resentment builds up fast when it feels one-sided, like you're always the one sacrificing.
Which brings us to the flip side, knowing when to stand your ground.
Because as much as compromise is important, so is staying true to yourself.
Right. There are times when you just got to draw a line in the sand.
Exactly. And those are usually the non-negotiables, your core values, beliefs, the things that make you, well, you.
Like, imagine compromising on a fundamental belief just to please your partner. That's a recipe for disaster down the line.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that your needs and values are valid, and it's okay to stand firm on them.
But then how do we distinguish between those non-negotiables and the things we can be more flexible on?
It takes practice, honestly,
Yeah.
and a good dose of self-awareness. Ask yourself, is this compromise ultimately going to bring us closer, or is it chipping away at who I am?
It's almost like you need to check in with yourself. Am I okay with this truly?
Yes. And if that little voice inside is screaming, no way, then it's probably a sign to stand your ground.
So how do we have these conversations, though? Especially when it comes to those tougher topics.
Communication is key. And I mean really communicating, listening to understand, not just to respond.
And choosing your battles.
Oh, totally. Not everything requires a deep dive debate. Sometimes letting the small stuff slide is the healthier choice.
Okay, so let's say we're trying to find that balance. What are some practical tips?
Well, first off, get clear on your own boundaries. What are your absolute no-go zones in a relationship?
And then communicate those boundaries to your partner, openly and honestly.
Right. And don't be afraid to revisit those boundaries as the relationship evolves.
Because what works in one season might not work in another.
Exactly. Relationships are dynamic, so flexibility is key.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into compromise and boundaries, I think the takeaway is this.
It's a dance, not a battle.
Love that. It's about finding that rhythm together where both partners feel respected, heard, and most importantly, like themselves.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And for all you listeners out there, we'd love to hear your thoughts. How do you define your personal boundaries in relationships? Hit us up on our socials, and let's keep the conversation going. Until next time.